As you know, today's talk is the mechanics of human evolution. Now, when we talk of evolution, we should remember that it doesn't start from scratch. It's a process that commences after the opposite of evolution has taken place. Always there's a great law of cycles where opposites are different but connected, and one comes up and the other goes down. So before we talk of evolution, there was what you call involution. There cannot be evolution without a previous involution, the opposite of evolution. And we'll say a few words about this involution. We are told that manifestation takes place and then a period of again cycles, manifestation and non-manifestation. So when manifestation is about to commence from the ever unknowable source, we know nothing about the source, it's way beyond our comprehension, so we call it the source. And when the source decides to awaken and manifest this universe, then there's a procedure called involution. The first thing that happens in that involution is that the source fills all space. All space is filled with, we know nothing about the source or the space, but it's filled with the essence of the source, first all space. And that remains till the whole period of manifestation. Throughout manifestation, the source has filled all space. We can't see it, we can't feel it. If you open a seed, all you see is space. But if you plant the seed, you get a tree. It is that essence of the source that motivates the seed to show its potential. Once that space is filled with the source, then by very powerful impulses of which we have no idea, but they are very powerful. And the first impulse that from the source creates matter as we know it, many levels of matter, 7 levels of matter. It just creates the matter. And then after an interval, another impulse, it creates the forms of matter, different forms, like the mineral, the plant, animal. These are forms, and we know that, and we are familiar with forms. Finally, when all the forms are in place, there is a further impulse to vivify the forms, to give them the life energy. So that's another impulse from the source that vivifies all the forms, so they are now alive. The process is only completed when the life force involves itself in the forms of matter until it reaches the densest level, which is the physical. The physical is the densest form of matter. So when the life force has vivified all the forms at all levels, that terminates the period of involution. The life force was involved in matter and forms, and that takes up half the time for the total manifestation period. Now, after that comes the opposite called evolution, which we will talk about. In evolution, the life force, which we will describe, begins to evolve the forms. The forms are just alive. They are not evolved. their potential has not been emerged. So the evolution consists of the life force evolving the forms over long periods of time, developing all their faculties, all their powers, all their principles, and successively this is done from all the levels of every form. When that is completed and the development of the potential is completed in all the forms, that is the end of evolution. There's no more growth, no more evolution remaining, and then that is the termination of the manifested. And again there's a period of non-manifestation equal in duration to the period of manifestation, and for some reason the source wakes up and says, let's manifest, and the process starts again. So it is a cycle like that, vast periods of time, and evolution is preceded by involution, which is very important to remember. Today we will be talking about human evolution, and for that we need to study the constitution of a human being. As we have been told before, humans have 7 principles that make up their constitution. The bottom diagram represents 4 principles called the quaternary, and the upper diagram has 3 principles called the tertiary. So there's a square at the bottom, and now this quaternary that you see collectively forms our personality. Persona is a Greek word meaning mask. So these 4 principles form our personality, and the personality, as you know, disintegrates at death. It's not permanent. The 3 upper principles survive death because they are connected to the source, and so they are permanent. They don't die. Now when the personality disintegrates, just before it dies, the brain conveys all the activities of that life in a flash in a lockbox, like collected in the permanent part of our constitution, in the causal body. It contains all the tendencies and our activities there. Now when the personality disintegrates, just as we put on clothes, different clothes, but our body is the same, the clothes are different. Similarly, the personality returns with a new personality, masking the permanent 3 principles of our constitution, and this goes on lifetime and lifetime. But the tendencies of the previous life that were collected in the permanent part of our constitution, they are like seeds, and the next life, the baby will have the seeds of the previous life in its consciousness, and as the baby grows, it will display those tendencies of the previous life. So there is no break in the continuity of the system. There's a pause, like a pause, a gap. But again, the process resumes when the new personality with the new brain masks our permanent principles. It's something like we have a coffee break, in workplace, everybody knocks off from work and then has a chat or maybe lets off some steam or something like that, and then the work resumes. So similarly here, the higher principles get some rest because they have been burdened with our temporary principles, and then they return. So this is the sequence of the birth process of life after life. Now, these four, this personality, we'll try and describe how it functions, because we are all personalities interacting with each other. So the personality has a physical body, which we are very much aware of. It has an emotional body, we are very much conscious of that, and we have a mental mind, a rational mind. In this diagram, this should be reading mind. It's not prana. Prana is a universal principle, so this you can read it as mind. Now, how the personality operates is that the senses, the physical body, we have senses. They sense an object outside of us, something attractive, something which it likes, the senses like it. And when the senses like an object of the senses, it creates a sensation in what is called a plasmal field, which is of energy. We call it the etheric at this stage. This etheric is an energy field that collects the vitality from the sun and distributes it to all our constitution. That is what keeps us alive. The vitality of the sun is transferred through this etheric body into all and we are alive because of that. So when the senses see an object, it creates a sensation in this field. And the moment the sensations are created, then the mind begins to have an idea of the object. It says, this is it, this is it, after the sensation is there. And then the mind evaluates the object, and at certain stage, our desire, our emotional body consists of desires. So the desire comes and says, I like this, I want this. And then we pursue the object of sense. So this is the sequence with which we function. We can say that a desire is an idea pursuing sensations. This is the sequence with which we operate. Now, obviously, our personality, the mind, is not completely developed. It's a rational mind of limited understanding. And I think you heard of Christian Science. Christian Science, it's a church founded by Mary Baker Eddy, and Madame Blavatsky mentions it in The Secret Doctrine also, that she stumbled upon the truth, Christian Science. And they have a church here also. And they call this rational mind of the personality the mortal mind. For one thing, it's going to die. But also, it's a false, it doesn't give all the answers we want in our lifetime. So it's mortal mind. Now, if you remember Buddha, he gave 4 noble truths, and he said that the cause of suffering is cravings. He called them cravings. We crave something, and whether it's good or bad, we exert all our efforts to acquire or fulfill our cravings. Actually, we can use the word desires in this sentence. So you see, the emotional body desires objects without considering the value because it likes it and it must have it. So it goes after the sense objects. That's how the personality operates. And to some extent, the mind delivers some progress. A man settles down and has a family, that is progress. Then he gets a promotion, and that's a progress too. And he maybe stands for politics and gets elected, another progress. So the personality thinks that the mind, because it's showing progress, will answer all my questions I have about life at all. It gives that promise, and we have no alternative. We only have that mind of rational mind. So it could happen that a person is talking to a friend. He says, I have realized all that was expected from me. My education I used to have a successful career. I've got a good family, children, I've got good friends, I'm well off, I can have vacations. But what is it that I feel that I am not complete? I have realized what is called the American dream. I have lived it and realized it. So that should be okay. But it's not okay because even when I'm supposed to be happy, I feel the futility of that happiness. There's an inner futility. So he's telling his friend that there seems to be a hole in the heart which no amount of success can fill. So this friend, maybe he's a good friend of his, he takes out a card and says, you see this address? You could go to the Houston Lodge if you like on a Saturday and see what if it helps you out. So he may go to the lodge and then he might like the people around him and he might pick up a literature or check out a book or something might. He may not come, he may come, but the option is there. I remember there was a lady who came for the first time and I talked to her and she said, no, I'm not coming back. I said, but you hardly been here, you haven't really. She says, no, people here don't hug as they should be hugging each other. So she didn't come back. So I'm just, so there are many reasons. I use the Houston Lodge as a symbol of where some wisdom is available to fill that hole in the heart. And now we'll see the process of evolution achieving that hole in the heart, So there is a higher order of life in us, a higher order. And that order is manifesting as spirituality consciousness. On top, the diagram on the top. The bottom diagram describes the process of how the personality, I explained to you that there's the physical senses, and then there's the plasmal sensations, and then the mind has ideas, and the emotional desires then want the objects of sense, and that is the circle that you see at the bottom. The top is our higher order of life. As I said, there's a higher order of life, and it manifests as spirituality consciousness. Now the characteristics of this consciousness is the nature of ideals in a thought process, which is manifested in the higher mind. You see, our minds, the only link between the personality and our permanent constitution is the mind. It's got many levels, starting with the rational mind, which I described how it goes. It generates the desire for senses. And then there's the higher mind, which is attached to the permanent part of the core. We call it the core, permanent core, a permanent core. So when the ideals are qualities of the higher mind, and they are altruitional. That means they are leading to altruism. When the personality functions, it's not concerned with ideals. It's got ideas to meet the goals it sets for itself. They're ideas. But the higher mind, the higher order of life, has ideals. And ideals, I told you, are qualities of our higher mind. So ideals transcend ideas because it's a whole superior level of consciousness. So when both are thoughts, an ideal is a thought, an idea is a thought, but the sources are very different. The qualities are very different. So the ideal transcend ideas. Now ideals are selfless because the source of ideas, that nature I told you is altruistic. So that is why ideals are selfless. And because they are selfless, as opposed to ideas that are not selfless to any great extent, they are concerned with the personal growth, the self-preservation, and which we described as the personality. So then, because the ideas have got this self or selfishness in it, it has little consideration for others. It's first concerned with itself, and then it can look around and be of some help to somebody else. But self-preservation is a very important factor in the functioning of the personality because it's going to disintegrate. So it wants to preserve its activity as much as it can. Whereas ideals give great consideration to others, and that is a mark of maturity, or you may say growth of character. So these ideals that we have in the higher mind, so the quality of our decision making, we take decisions. So the quality of our decision making is determined by how much the ideas are guided by ideals, or how much of the ideas are founded on ideals, which is a very important step in bringing down the higher into the lower, that hole in the heart. It starts with having ideals as a thought process. Now the next step would be of implementing the ideals as a thought, like an idea. Implementing that ideal is the next requirement, just as implementing a desire is what is done at the personal level. So at the higher level, we implement ideals. Now, many people are put off by the word ideals, Somehow they think that an ideal is perfection, and I cannot ever be perfect, so cultivating ideals is not for me. Or idealists are wishy-washy people, The head is in the clouds maybe, and the feet are not on the ground, not practical like that. And they put up with the word ideals. So if that is the case, then we use the resolutions, We have resolutions. At New Year, we make some resolutions, And a resolution also is an intention to uh, improve ourselves. I resolve, say, I'll be more patient, and the person keeps trying to be patient and might become more patient, and he succeeded there. Or man might say, I'll be less irritable. That's a good target. Or maybe a lady might say, I'll not nag my husband so much now. So that is also a worthy resolution, and things like that, you know. So these ideals are very necessary to activate the higher mind. The higher mind does not entertain ideas, it entertains ideals. And the reason is that the personality by itself cannot evolve. Your rational mind cannot evolve. It promises to evolve. It promises success. It promises fame. It promises power. It promises control. It promises recognition. So the personality is sort of seduced by this attractive offer of the mind and contains to have ideas. If it's told that you have to evolve, he'll say, yes, my mind will make that evolution possible. But it's not possible. The personality cannot evolve with the rational mind. That would be like a man standing in a bucket and wanting to lift himself up. He can't lift himself up in the bucket unless he's helped. So when we are aware that evolution requires an awakening of our higher mind, which is the only link from the personal consciousness, spiritual, to the personal consciousness. So it's very important that we inculcate ideals. And implementing them or living them brings us into a state called virtue. Virtue. Now that is a word that's somewhat old-fashioned nowadays, you know. Maybe our grandparents talked of that, but now virtues are dated like. But from the theosophical angle, a virtue is an ideal that is lived or implemented. So now the virtues, just as we thought that the ideals are from the altruition nature, mental ideals, our virtues are from the intuitional nature we have. We have an intuitional nature. And the intuitional nature functions without reasoning. It doesn't need reasoning because it knows. When you know, we bypass reasoning to arrive at knowledge. It's a direct perception of truth. We have this flashes sometimes that this is it. We can't explain it by logic, but it proves true. That nature is called intuitional, and the virtues are qualities of that part of our nature. So where there is virtue, there is true intelligence, because to know something without reasoning indicates a very superior level of intelligence. So when there is virtue, there is true intelligence. And when that is stabilized, that is really our highest ethical center. Ethical center is there when the virtue is present, because it's managed by true intelligence. And this ethical center at the mental level is our conscience. We all know we have a conscience, that irritating small voice, you know, alerting us that you should not be thinking the way you're thinking, or the way you're feeling. You should not be feeling like that. It's like a smoke alarm we have in the house that alerts to some danger. So it alerts us when we stray in our thoughts and feelings, and we do that, and the conscience is there because it's coming from the highest ethical center. So this is a very important requirement if we are aware that evolution is unavoidable and we should proceed as soon as possible and as quickly as possible to develop it based on the information you have in the lodge and other places, things like that. Now when these virtues get stabilized, how? By translating more ideals into virtues. It's a process. We've said at the lower level, a desire is an idea pursuing sensations. Now the ability to implement a virtue comes from the emotion, a desire, but not the lower desire, a higher desire called aspiration. Just as the ordinary desire pursues objects of sense, of the personality, similarly, the higher value of emotional body is aspiration. Aspiration is longing for something higher and bigger than us. We don't know what it is, but it's worth looking out for, an aspiration. We feel that it's worth trying. So when aspirations is the energy behind ideals, you get the virtue. Without aspiration, ideals cannot be implemented. Just like without desires, you don't get the objects of sense. So it's a higher order of functioning, but the same emotional body is involved at the higher level, ideas are involved at the higher level, ideals, sensations are involved at a higher level called virtues. So when this process goes on, it actually shows that the consciousness of the personality, human consciousness, gets purified by a higher level of consciousness because we've got ideals in the mind and we've got virtues as a character building. So the personality then becomes an asset rather than a hindrance at evolution. In the beginning it's a hindrance because the mind refuses to have ideals. It persists that power and control and fame are sufficient goals for your life. And a lot of people agree with that and conduct their lives on that principle. But the few who are aware that this is not the complete answer and want to fill that hole in the heart, then they adopt a procedure of raising the desire to aspiration, raising the idea to ideals, elevating the sensations to virtues. And that's a cycle that is operating when we understand the necessity of doing that. Now, when the virtues get stabilized, we said that the intuitional nature is the source of intelligence, and the virtue, where there's virtue, there is true intelligence. So if we can manage to keep converting ideals to virtues one after the other, when we do that, we tap into a very high superior level of consciousness, which is called the center of that top diagram, Atma, and the word will is there, will. So it is the will that is driving the determination to implement ideals, the will. Now, you know there's a prayer in Christianity, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. There's a prayer like that, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. So we can ask that question, okay, what is this will? You can't put a finger on it. How do you define it? So we are told that the will of that higher principle is the laws of nature. It's the laws of nature that regulate evolution and progress and represent the will of the Creator. The reason why this is happening is, I should explain, is that this word Atma is a ray from the Godhead. Godhead we don't know, the source, we just use a word for it. It's impossible to know anything about it. But when manifest starts, it sends out a ray and we call that the Atma. Now that ray is the essence of the Godhead in a form of a ray. And what the ray does is that it possesses or tries to implement the process of manifestation in all its complexity. And for that it has a blueprint. You know, when we build a house, we have to have a blueprint, and then the construction follows the blueprint. And if there's errors in the construction, then it's redone. So there's a blueprint which is called the divine idea, which is implementing the divine plan of the source for throughout manifestation. It's a complicated blueprint. And the agency that implements it is a combination of this ray. This ray is not differentiated, it's just pure consciousness, pure intelligence with no variation. So attached to this ray is a vehicle of action called buddhi on the left, intuitional. I told you it requires no reasoning because it knows, intuitional. That buddhi actively begins to implement that blueprint. Very complicated, very lengthy, but always a blueprint is there. And then we are also to participate in that blueprint, but we don't make a good job of it, and we have to redo it again and again as our lives dictate. The reason why we have to redo our lives is because the intelligence which we rely on, the rational mind, cannot give us an alignment with the laws of nature, which represent the will of the Creator. So to the extent we act aligned to the laws of nature is the degree to which we accept the will of the Creator. And the extent to which we violate the laws, which are enormous, is the degree we deviate from the will of the Creator. So however religious we may be, or whatever we profess, it's that consciousness in us that determines your relationship with the Creator. The consciousness has to rise, and we've described the process: ideals in your thoughts, aspiration in your desires, virtues in your character. All these put together constitute an attachment. So what is happening over time is that the consciousness of the personality that started, we described it, gets enriched with this spiritual consciousness, because we have ideas, ideals, virtues, aspiration. So now the personality, which was a handicap, as I've mentioned initially, is now an asset. It's a partner in the process of our human evolution. So that's a very important stage when the personality participates in evolution on a positive side, because its consciousness contains the spiritual consciousness of a permanent nature. So the evolution is not of the permanent nature. There's a people say evolution of the soul. the soul is complete, totally complete. That's why it doesn't die. If it was defective, it would have to change and improve. It doesn't need any improvement because it doesn't die. What evolves is the consciousness of the personality. And that we have described the process, how by developing ideals in our thoughts, so tapping into the higher mind or elevating the desires to aspirations and generating virtues in our character. These are all functions of a higher order, spiritual. So the personality then begins to act in concert with the higher nature, and the two begin to cooperate rather than to separate. The ordinary consciousness of our personality is separative. Everything appears separative. Black and white are all separate. Whereas the consciousness of the spirituality has a unity in diversity. It unites because it's present in all things. This combination of the Atma and Buddhi is called the monad. And it's the spiritual unit of spirituality. Just like light, unit of light is photons, the unit of weight is a pound. So there's a unit of spirituality, shiny spark of spirituality. It is these, when I said the life force enters during involution in all forms, it is these very monads that enter and vivify all the forms. They are of the nature of the Godhead, and they are the active agents of evolution, trying to implement that blueprint because they have that intelligence to do it through the laws of nature, which represent the will of the Creator on earth. So that's the procedure, that mechanism that sustains evolution as we know it. Now, when there is this personality begins to have a spiritual content in his thoughts, in his desires, in his actions, it's altruistic and not the opposite. Then we have what is called a wholeness of consciousness, a holistic level of life. Holistic, holy, which is the word that is used. That holistic or wholeness of consciousness in our personality that gives us a chance of healing, of better health, an elevation of all our faculties because it is holistic. And that is an outcome when the personality begins to assist in evolution rather than resist it. It will keep resisting. On its own, it will never admit, okay, no, I want help. It will always say, I will serve your goals. And the science supplements that. A physical science will say, we got the tools, we go into space, or we have this instant communication and all this technology. Is physical science, which the mind utilizes to dictate the functioning of the personality. So this is, in brief, a summary. So I could like to address it from another angle, which we can call the anatomy of growth. That could also be a title similar to this, because this growth is involved. But what the personality thinks as growth is very different from what nature defines as progress. It's growth of consciousness, not of matter, not of achievement, not an outer level of functioning. That is the criteria of the personality. But the criteria of nature is the evolution of consciousness, the inner content that is driving the outer form of life. So we can talk of the anatomy of growth from the parameters of growth. And the first parameter of growth is what is called stability, which is very evident, stability. This lodge, for instance, has a slab, one slab, and yet it sustains all the different activities of the lodge. You change this room and make this change and add this and that, but the foundation doesn't change because you change the functioning. All the activity of the lodge, varied activity, is stabilized and sustained by the single slab. The slab is invisible. One can't see it, In fact, we don't even remember it as a foundation. But without that foundation able to sustain all the activities, we can't use the lodge safely and comfortably. So maybe John can consider spending a few seconds every time we meet to remember the foundation of this lodge, this allowing us to meet the way we meet. Now, that is stability is on the physical level, very evident. What is the stability in our lives? And that stability is the true intelligence which does not change or needs no reasoning, which knows. That intelligence is our stable quality of consciousness. And because this is not developed yet in us to any great extent, our lives don't have that stability, the reliability. We have to redo, like if the foundation crumbles, we have to redo the superstructure. So we are redoing our lives over and over again because that true intelligence is not yet sufficiently awakened in us to take action aligned with the laws of nature. Any action that violates the law of nature doesn't tally with the blueprint which is being implemented by nature. So when it doesn't tally with that requirement, it has to be redone. And that is why we have to redo our lives, solve the problems, solve one problem and create another problem, and then try to solve that. So our life goes basically in problem solving and not in evolving. If the consciousness remains at the personal level, at the level of the rational mind, which dictates to us from birth that I will answer all your needs and fulfill all your needs. It's only when we see through that we look around and search and try and find an answer. So the stability, as it increases, will increase the reliability of our actions. It will increase the adaptability, ability to change everything safely because the foundation is there to sustain it. So this is a stage on the anatomy of growth, the stability that results in adaptability, flexibility without damaging it. All the activity of this universe is legitimate because it's powered by that all-knowing intelligence. We can call it transcendental intelligence or supreme intelligence or divine intelligence. It's that implementing that blueprint accurately, so it doesn't have to redo it. We are the only species that do not contribute properly to that blueprint because we are given the tools to be self-aware. No other species is in any way affected adversely except ourselves because we are given the tools to evolve on our own. This is one difficulty we face, that it's basically a do-it-yourself project. Our evolution can be helped, guided, advised, but you have to do it yourself. You have to travel the path. You have to evolve your mind to have ideals. You are the one who's elevate your desires. There's nobody else can live our life. And many people are not happy with that. So maybe they turn to a church or a mosque or a temple that says, don't worry, just have little faith and repent and you'll be all right and saved. But that is not the fact. You have to travel and exert and evolve all your faculties to the fullest to gain the ultimate goal of returning to the source, which is the process of evolution. The Quran has a phrase that says, "He came from the source and unto me is the return." He came from the source and unto me is the return. This is that process of involution and then evolution. And we are on the same path. But the halfway mark is over, but we have just crossed the halfway mark. So we are very in the infancy of our evolution. They said that this whole process is completed in 7 big cycles. And we are in the 4th cycle. That means 3.5 mark, the halfway mark when involution was completed. So we have just emerged on the evolutionary cycle. And that's the reason why we are so frail in the level of our consciousness. This is the reason for that. We have yet to go way ahead, but we are aware, and with the help of this knowledge, this information, we can expedite our evolution if we are so motivated. So we have come to this flexibility. A process of purification has been going on. Purification doesn't mean in any moral sense. It means that our consciousness at the personal level is being elevated to a more spiritual level. That's called a purification of consciousness. Like water, we drink it, but if it's purified, it's better to have a more purified water rather than a muddy. Both are waters, but the water purified is better for our health. So a superior consciousness of the spiritual nature is much more advantageous to a human being, but it has to work at it. It will not come just by sitting down or wanting it or wishing it or reading about it or hearing about it even. It has to be worked on. So this purification, when it occurs, and we have seen the process, a process of integration takes place. Integration. Integration is possible when there's something compatible between two qualities or two things. You know, when two circles intersect, there's an area common to both. It belongs to both in a way. Both can claim that area at the same time. That is an integration of circles. So in our case, the other one. Yeah, these two circles of functioning, the personal level and the spiritual level. And we have seen how these two circles come together via the higher mind having ideals, which is upgrade of ideas and slowly the virtues. As that takes place, the integration of these two circles increases more and more. And so there is that compatibility of the human nature with the spiritual consciousness. And that leads to progress. And progress is necessary for growth. So that is how we can define the anatomy of growth also in the terms, or rather than the talk we had of stability, adaptability, purification, integration, and progress. That gives the same results that we have discussed for evolving our human nature. Is there any questions anybody had?
Okay, any questions?
This talk today is based on an article by Bing Escudora. Now Bing was a very talented theosophist born in the Philippines, and he became a president of the Philippine Association, and he moved to America. He worked here. He was 11 years in the National. He was a great speaker. And in fact, he passed away in 2005, but there's a society devoted only to preserving his writings and his tapes. And I remember when we pulled down the apartment at the back, Thelma salvaged some tapes and literature from there. And I noticed that Bing's tapes and talks were in, it must be somewhere in the lodge, but Bing Escudero was the author of this article, which I used for my talk today.
So this is my first time coming here. I joined Jay O'Brien, who you may or may not know. I appreciated the, well, it's just a comment really. You spoke of a lower ideal and a higher ideal, and the lower ideal is really concerned with self-preservation. And I was just, so I'm not an economist, but I have read that the field of economics, so like Keynesian thought and these various schools of economics, basically make the statement that the reason that we function the way we do in society is ultimately for self-preservation, which, so these economic forces or, the laws that drive economics, etc., are based in this fact. And it's an intriguing thought because hopefully, or ideally maybe, that humanity will evolve more and that we will interact with each other in a way that is less about self-preservation and more about for the greater good. The success of the whole is in part the success of the part. And I don't know if you have a thought on that.
Pardon? Yeah, when we say altruistic, ideals are of an altruistic nature. It means, altruism means contribution to others. Altruism is that. And ideals, it involves sometimes self-sacrifice, because when you work for an ideal, you against the current of society at present, against the tendencies of, our education is idea-based, not ideal-based. So because it's idea-based, our career is also follows the same idea-based careers we have seen. And so if education becomes ideal-based on ideals, culturing ideals from birth, then certainly society will show that value of ideals in its functioning, in the politics, in the economics, in medical, every area will show the benefit of a ideal based on ideals rather than ideas. So it's a question of time. Even now people are ideals. They are protesting, they are petitioning, they are agitating for change in the right direction. These are all ideals that they are practicing, and they are virtues in their character. But they may not know it, they may not term it like that, but their actions show a lot of people are exhibiting ideals in their functioning and cultivating a character of a high ethical nature.
The evolution of the mind. Our educational system claims to train the mind.
Yeah.
So we also know that the mind evolves from impulses from the higher bodies.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile the idea that the educational system, through its critical thinking skills, through music, through the art, also claims that the mind is developed that way?
Yeah, gets ideas, yes. Now one item which I should have mentioned is when the virtues display true intelligence. I gave you the four noble of Buddha, that craving is the cause of our suffering. He also gave a prescription for growth called the Noble Eightfold Path, eightfold. And every 8 phrases starts with the word right. Right view, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, 8. Now we would take that word right at an ordinary level. We'll say, yes, you're right, you're correct. But that's not what the Buddha's right means. Right means backed by true intelligence. Then your conduct, your livelihood, your outlook, your speech, your actions, and everything is consistent with the laws of nature. So when you read these Buddhist texts, we should understand that the words might mean very literally, then you don't get the real message of this eightfold path. Right requires true intelligence to implement them. So only when it was a meaning that when one becomes virtuous, that you can use these guidelines for right living. And that is what the eightfold path is. But provided we elevate our consciousness to implement these guidelines. So that is, you may say, culturing the mind with true intelligence. It's a stage of evolution.
Our livelihood. My job is in space exploration, and I begin to think that this is the wrong path, because we're supposed to evolve our nature, not evolve our spaceships. What do you think about that?
I didn't catch the question. Can somebody explain?
The space program, I think, I'm beginning to think is the wrong direction for humanity to go. We are going to go to Mars and in spaceship, and I think that's the very wrong path. And that's what I'm involved in. I think that we should try to evolve our minds, our emotions, and to become better so we can go to Mars, but by ourselves, without the spaceship.
Okay. Yeah, space travel. Actually, you see, this is everybody has a career, different careers, different situations, different pressures. The only solution for every career is to have an inner stability, which I talked about. If we have that stability like a foundation, it doesn't matter what we do to the lodge. We can do this thing, that thing, and it's successful. So if we want the same in our lives, we have to develop, and that true intelligence is not developed by your career or by your family, your friends. It's an inner aspiration we should have, an inner desire to develop. When we activate that desire appropriately and acquire the stability, then it doesn't matter what job you do or what you meet, because that stability will sustain you through that activity. Like all the activity of this lodge is sustained safely by one foundation. And all the activity of the universe is safely manifesting because it's powered by that all-knowing intelligence of the source. So when we duplicate, we are made in the image of the Creator. So when we are made in the image of the Creator, it implies that we can comprehend Him at all levels of our faculty, because we are made in the image of the Creator. And we have seen that we have got this higher imperishable core that has the qualities of the creator, the will, the, uh, the intelligence, the altruism. So when we use that in our lives, it really doesn't matter what career you have, what friends you have, it will always work out because you're in tune with the laws of nature, with that intelligence. But without that intelligence, and we don't have it fully, we are sometimes aligned to the laws, but mostly violate the laws. And our lives are then spent in repairing our lives. And repairing is not a pleasant experience. Here, here.
These two people are arguing. I think this is so kind of typical, really, of the sort of thing that can happen. And so someone comes up and they're arguing, and what's the matter? So one of them explains the whole side of the argument to him and everything, his side, and tells him what's going on. And he says, well, you are right. So the other one says, wait a minute, you didn't hear my side of the story, right? Yeah.
So what's the question?
Well, they don't know, they're just arguing. It's just an argument, but we don't know what the argument is. But,
Okay.
yeah, it's a joke. And so,
Okay, that's good.
so the other one says, blah, 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 tells the whole side of the story from his side of the story. And when he heard that, he went, well, you're right. And so this other person came up and said, well, wait a minute, they can't both be right. And he said, you're right.
Okay. Yes, Bob.
We have a question.
What she spoke about is kind of interesting because there are two different people on different levels of evolution. There's two different people who are looking at the same thing through different views. And so they see something differently.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that either one of them are right. They are each in their own space and time, at their own place of development.
That is why we are advised not to be judgmental, because if we put ourselves in the shoes of the other person, then we can understand where they are coming from. But if we ignore that and only interpose our view on him, we do not know that person's life, what they have gone through, the troubles they've had, the setbacks they've had, that is reflected in what they are saying. So we are advised to avoid judgments when it's not necessary. We use judgment in our life at all times to evaluate a job, a house, or a car. But when we use the same judgment in life, we fall, a separation occurs. So life is not a project. Projects require judgment, evaluation, decisions. But life is not a project, it's a process of change. And so judgment at any time is detrimental to coming closer to each other. That's why the reason why we avoid judgment. But it's automatic. As soon as you see a person, you form an image of that person, a sort of categorization of that person. And our task is to not allow that categorization to affect our interaction with that person. It might be there, but we avoid it to interfere with the interaction of that person at that time.
Fali, my question is, how do you get to that maturity level of not judging?
Yeah,
Because it's a-
yeah. This is
the four
yeah, this is-
fundamental.
now.
What about the ideas?
Yes, this is another talk, how to achieve all this. I just said we need to have ideas. I didn't explain the procedure for elevating ideas to ideas. That requires another talk of self-development, of which meditation plays a big part. No, we talked of cycles, always there are cycles. If I blink my eye and open it, it is also a cycle, very brief. But by closing the eyes, I don't see. But when I open, they are cleaner, so I can see better. So we can say that meditation is blinking of the mind. In activity, the mind has some cobwebs, reactions, beliefs. So when we meditate and blink the mind, we clear it to some extent. And then if you hear something good, you can implement it. But if the mind is also clogged, it cannot implement what you hear. It's already clogged. A clogged system doesn't allow the water to flow. So we unclog our minds and then we are receptive to truth. That's natural. But if we clog the minds and don't cater to its needs, then we have an uphill task. Everything is not good. Everything is critical. We are critical of everything because that's the nature of a clogged mind. And most of us have a clogged mind that prevents us from getting across to the other person. We have to unclog our minds with suitable steps, That is another talk by itself, of self-development, what to do about it.
Okay, let's thank Fali for giving us a wonderful